What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the second video on the Rockabilly build. Now, if you didn't catch the first one, we went through stage 1 of the build. This is going to dive into stage 2 of the fabrication. In the first video, we got the first step done, which only involved straight tubes, no bends. And in this video, we're going to dive into stage 2, which has a lot of bent tubes. We're also going to get into how to use the bender and how the templates are set up to maximize the usage of that bender as well. So let's dive into stage 2. With stage 1 complete, this is where the chassis sits. Now we need to start prepping all of our tubes for stage 2. So this one here is very similar to the last stage where you just have straight length tubes. These are easy to just get cut and go from there. But what we're going to focus on first is going to be some of these bent templates and exactly how to utilize these for kind of maximum efficiency. With the straight tubes, we basically just put the tubing into the jig and cut it to length. With this one, we want to do the bend before we do any cutting, just to make sure that you don't end up cutting something too short. One thing to note on these templates is that you have a raised section there, and that is for a reason. That raised section starts a certain distance back from where the tube starts the bend. And that distance that is done there is calibrated to my bender. If you don't have a tubing bender, you can buy the one that I offer off of Send Cut Send. And by buying those parts and the 3D printed files off my website, you can utilize this template to kind of maximize the ease that this whole process takes. Now, with a single bend, it's not as important because you can leave yourself some fudge room on the end. But if you want to make the most efficient use of your tubing, this does come in handy. So I'm going to leave myself about 1/8 of an inch here, maybe a little bit more. And I made a line that correlates with that step on the 3D printed template. So this is my assembled bender. Again, it uses some Send Cut Send parts as well as some 3D printed parts in a handful of areas to finish it off. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to insert our tubing through and into this loop here. Now, that line, we are going to line up right with the edge of this follower. Put a little bit of tension on it itself, making sure that the line still lines up with the edge of that piece. And now we can start our bend. We are going to use our template as a guide though. I'm going to use it just as a visual reference. I'm going to hold it behind the actual tubing, and then as I bend up, I'm going to watch to try and make sure that it matches as I go. After you bend it, you can put it back in the template just to make sure that it fits and that you don't need to do any adjustments to the bend. But now that it's finished, you can see that my line still lines up with the step in the template. Still have about 1/8 of an inch on that end. And now we can mark and cut to the exact length, or we can just cut it in the jig on the bandsaw again, like I showed you previously. Stage 2 has 4 single bend tubes, which you see here. Those are the easiest ones. From there, you end up with double bend tubes like these here. So these have the same reference line that you can see there and there. So we're going to start by doing one side at a time, and I'm just going to make sure I leave plenty of excess so that I can trim it to length and I don't end up short. So we're going to start with one side, bend it, then once we have that side dialed, we can then mark this side and then bend that. It's good to bend from the middle out just to make sure that your tubes are as symmetrical as possible. That's typically the best way to go. So we've got 2 that are that way. These, the tube bend is in the same plane, no rotation needed between bends. So that is the easier of the multiple bend tubing methods. From there, we get into the harder versions where you've got 2 bends, but one is at a different angle than the other. And we'll get into exactly how to do that. Also, this is a pretty long tube template, as you can see. But in the download package, there's a multi-piece version of it, like this one here, where you can see it's printed in 2 pieces with an overlap. So if you've got one of the smaller printers, you can print this in 2 sections without having to do any slicing of that yourself. So once your first bend is made, now you can mark the second bend and then take it over to the bender. Once it's in the bender and you've got your reference line lined up with that loop, now you'll want to come to this side and you'll want to make sure that this tube matches the rotation of the rest of the tubing. Since everything is straight on this one, it needs to be straight here. Now on to the hardest tube of the build. Once you get these two done, things get easier. But we're gonna start by doing our first bend, similar like we did the other one. However, we're not gonna start from the center on these because they're asymmetrical bends. So we're just gonna make sure that our piece of tubing is plenty long. I'm gonna give myself a small amount of gap here at the start just to go with. Again, if you wanna be extra careful, just give yourself an inch, you know, just be conservative. But once you get the hang of this, you can get pretty tight with it. But from there, we're gonna make our first mark, do our first bend, and then we'll come on to the harder part. But we'll get that done first, then we'll come back. Once the first bend is done, mark your second line. Now you do have to do a little bit of projection here just because it won't sit down flat. But once you do that, get it marked, and then it is a good idea to continue that line all the way around the tube. Just take it out of the jig and do it on the edge of your bench, just because of when it goes into the bender, sometimes it's not on the side that you need to see it on. So now with the tube in the bender, again, the line lined up, now we need to take our template and start to match up the angles. The portion of the template that we're concerned with is this side here. That's the one that we're bending. So we need to tilt the template until that section comes into line. And you can kind of see that top edge comes into a straight line projection about there. So that is where we want to tilt the template. And then the rear portion, you can see how it kicks off to the side. And that is the angle that we need to match the back portion of the tubing. So we've got this angle matched to this angle. This is following a straight line of the tubing. Should be ready to go. And it looks like we got it pretty close on the first shot. I'm going to give this just another couple of degrees. But there we go. Looks good. All fits in the tube or in the template. We're set. Another option for making sure that you get your rotation right is you can use a digital angle finder. So I've zeroed it out with everything sitting flat and level, and then we can go to this section here, which will come out to 14.2, somewhere in there. And we can remember that number. Now, if we hold our template up, we can see that the tubing is going to lay to the left this time. So from here, we can go to 14.2. Then as a check, we can hold our template up to see how it matches. And the angle looks very similar. So let's bend it. And from there, you end up with a pretty reliable bend as well. A little bit of spring in there, but not enough to worry about, something that will easily be compensated for in the fixture. So we have all of our tubes bent and cut to length. The ones that we needed multiple of are cut and marked over there. And now it's time to assemble the fixturing to go onto the base that we previously did. Now we'll start with these uprights. These can only go in one way. You can see the shape of this lower portion here, specifically this little raise here. That correlates to the raise in the upright. So again, it'll only go in on one side, and it'll go to the inside of the chassis itself, like that. Next, you can grab the lower section of the door. Now, the door has a bar that goes, and then it kicks up towards the end, and this is towards the rear of the car. So this kick up will go to the back side, and it will attach to this boss here. sitting right there. Once those sections are attached, we can move to the upper section. The upper section will bolt to the inside of that upright through those two holes there. Now that the upper sections are attached, we can add the rear portions of the cage. These two holes here correlate to these holes on the back side of the upper portion, and those two correlate with these two. Once all of those pieces are attached, you can use the connector plates, which are these three pieces here, to tie the halves together. So here and here, here and here, and then here to here. Similar to stage one, there's one piece of laser cut material that needs to get dropped into the fixtures before we start. So get it cut out of the tree and it'll get placed into the jig. This part does need to be tapped to M2.5 for the body panels. So you can do that after you actually weld it in, or you can do it before. If you do it before, if anything were to happen, like you break a tap, it wouldn't be stuck in your chassis, but you probably will have to go back and chase them one more time after you weld, just because the expansion due to the welding can affect those screw holes. For tapping this piece on the bench, one thing that I am going to do first is I'm going to use a countersink or a spot drill bit, and I'm going to hit each hole first for just a second. That's because the laser cut process can leave a hardened burr on the edge of the hole. You can kind of see it there, that heat affected zone. That can be extremely hard, and that's really hard on taps. So one little thing that you can just do to help keep your tap alive and not break anything is just to hit the hole with a spot drill really quickly. You can use a bigger drill bit if you don't have one of these, but just an easy tip. Otherwise, it's a good idea to start tapping from the other side of the steel, and you should have decent results even if you don't do any cleanup. After I've done that, I'll take my M2.5 spiral cut tap, I'll put it in my drill, and I'll use a little bit of tapping fluid or anchor lube here, and we'll tap each of these holes. Now comes another one of the tricky steps, and that is getting all of the tubes fit and notched together, because each one can kind of depend on another tube that isn't there yet. So you just kind of have to keep working in a circle to get all of the tubes done. Now, the door bar here, the top line of the door, that one is a good one to start with in the fixture, because the front side of it continues past and nothing butts up to the end of it. So the A pillar, which is this one here, as it comes down, it gets coped into this one. The lower B pillar will get coped into it as well. This end is just exposed, and we'll take care of that in a later step. But for now, this is a good one to start with. It does require a cope on this side, but that's just one. So at least we have a good starting point to go with this. So now I have put the zip ties on here, but they're not tight because I do need to be able to take this in and out to, again, cope this end and make sure everything keeps fitting. This one, we'll get that end coped down at the A-pillar side, and then later on we'll have to work on the tail end. But it's just a way to keep working around. Now, it would take a long time to kind of walk through every single one of these, so I'm gonna show you a couple of them, and then from there, you'll just kind of have to, again, keep working in this circular pattern to get all of them cut and fit and notched together to sit in the chassis. And important to note before you start notching tubing is that these tubes won't sit into the fixture until they're coped. So you kind of have to hold them in place and then mark your cope line as you see here. Now, the flat line is the angle that I need to cope at. And then that line that goes along the length of the tubing is my reference line, so that when I put it into my fixture to cope, I know that I need to keep that straight up, not over here rotated down or rotated too far back. That makes sure that I keep my cope in line with what I'm trying to match up to. So you'll want to do that as you go along. It's just an easy way to reference what you're trying to do. So I have the A to C pillar in the jig and done. The rear bar, the top rear bar that the C pillar ties into, also does not get a cope on either side. So I was able to put into the fixture permanently, zip tied in, and the fixture is lined with the foil. So that one is good to go. Now, I've got it secured in there, but it may have to come in and out. So you may end up wasting zip ties, taking a tube in and out just for other tubes that have to go in over time. Just like it might be hard to get this one to snap in if this side is permanent, unless you have that side loose. Little things like that, again, it may just have to be an iterative thing. Now, next I'm working on the B pillar here. This is, again, a non-symmetrical. One side is slightly longer than the other. The slightly longer side I'm putting towards the bottom. Now, the reason I bring that one up is that I've got the bottom coped, but one reason that it may not sit fully into the fixture is because right at that joint, there is a crossbar. So since this is a half round cope to it, the one side of that is going to be interfering with that tube. So you are gonna have to go in and just make sure that you remove that back side of that fish mouth, however you plan to do that. I'll probably use my die grinder here with this abrasive pad on it just to take off the back side. But I'm gonna do that, test fit it to see if it will fit. Now, I did move this bar forward a little bit so that I could just get it in there, test fit it, make sure, and then I'm gonna have to go in and cope this one again to make sure that it matches up to this tube. Again, we're just slowly working our way through this constantly. I could remove this tube entirely, but I wanted it in place just so that it was matching up with this to make sure that this thing didn't move or rotate in any way while I was working on this tube. This is stage 2, all fitted into the fixture. It is a lot of work. This is the most work of any stage of this build. Once you get past this, it all kind of feels like a smooth sailing section after that. This tube here and this tube here do have one complicated cope just because of the steep angle and how it intersects with this cross tube here. So you do need to determine how you're going to do that. You can do it a number of ways. You could cope this one at the angle. I decided to go with the C-pillar into a full cope to the rear, and then have the rear belt line bar cope into that tube. You could do it either way. You could do it a combination. You kind of split the difference. It's all just kind of personal preference or how you plan to fabricate it as you go. But that one is one to note. The lower windshield bar can be a little bit of a tricky because it's at a slight, or a pretty good downward angle, and then it lands into that intersection there. So that one's a little bit of a complicated cope. Up here, you've got a similar tube that's an easier version of it. So that one's a little bit easier to get fitted into the chassis, but worth noting nonetheless. Beyond that, the rear seatbelt bar, the one that goes across where like your harnesses would mount if it was a full-size car, that one is tucked inside that fixture there. So make sure you don't forget it. It can be kind of out of sight, out of mind. So worth noting, make sure that that one gets in there. Make sure that as you fit all of these tubes that this gap stays tight. You don't want any space between this laser cut piece and the tubing. So make sure that you're not putting too wide of a piece of tube in there and it's pushing any of those tubes out of position. At this point, this is ready to tack together. Now, this isn't the end of stage 2. There's a stage 2.1, which has a few other pieces that get put on once you pull these fixtures out. So that's going to be our next section. But first thing we've got to do is get this tacked together, everything held into place securely so that we can remove everything from the fixtures and move on. Now on stage 2.1, we are going to need some 1/8 inch thick solid rod. You can pick that up at a local hardware store. That stuff's pretty readily available. Before I start welding, I'm actually removing the tubes from the jig, and I've got some foil tape that I'm using that it's a little bit easier to line the jigs with. So I'm gonna go through and pull the tubes off, put the tape in place, and then reinstall the tubes, and then we'll start welding. Stage 2 is all tacked up. The foil does seem to be helping. I did lose one zip tie again, but that was all on this round. Just minimal tacks, one per joint everywhere that I could. And now I can get, actually, I need to get that seatbelt bar tacked in. That one is easy to forget. So I'm gonna do that one, and then I'm gonna take this out of the jig so that I can get it welded up. Got it out of the jig. I went through and did a cleaning on it with the wire wheel in the drill press and in the drill itself. Just get everything nice and clean. Sometimes when you're welding, since the shielding gas is coming from one side, the shielding gas may not hit the back side of the tube as well, so it can oxidize back there. So to try and get as best joint as possible. You get that oxidation cleaned back off, like with a wire brush, and then I just did a wipe down with some alcohol again. It just gives me the best bet of the best joints that I'm capable of. So while my welding is still, you know, amateur, I can at least give myself a leg up by doing good prep. I actually need to clean that area a little bit more just to, I can see I've got some trouble areas there that I just missed a little bit. So I'll clean those up, then go back in with the welder and we'll start fully welding out this stage. And that's the finished status of stage 2. Now, there is a stage 2.1, but in order to keep these videos in a slightly more reasonable length, I'm gonna include that one in the next video. But we're out of the jig, we're fully welded out. I've got the chassis cleaned and prepped so that I can go easily to the next stage. If you're interested in taking on this project or one like it, I'll put a link down below to my website where there's a link and you can find this build package as well as the Jimmy's Moon Buggy, where you can get the download so that you can print all of the fixtures. It gives you the instructions and details, interior bits, all of that, what you need to complete a truck like this, as well as a list of the other drivetrain components and things like that that may be helpful. But if you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already. If you're interested in seeing these videos early, again, you can check out the channel membership, which helps support the channel a little bit extra as well. But that's gonna do it for this episode on the Rockabilly build. See you on the next one.